I was 33 years old when my father humiliated me in front of our entire family. It happened on what was supposed to be a happy day, my grandfather's 85th birthday. The party was held in the backyard of my grandparents' home in Ohio. Nearly everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. There were balloons, music, and long tables covered with food. Grandpa sat at the center, smiling as people took turns sharing memories and giving speeches. Which country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories. I should have known something was coming. My father and I had never been close. Growing up, nothing I did was ever enough for him. Straight A's? Not impressive. College degree? Expected. Building a successful career on my own? He barely acknowledged it. Meanwhile, my younger brother Jason could do no wrong. By the time the speeches started, I was already feeling uncomfortable. Dad had been drinking, and whenever he drank, his opinions became louder. Then he stood up. At first, everyone laughed, expecting one of his usual stories. Instead, he pointed directly at me. You know, he said with a smirk, Grandpa always cared about family legacy. That's why it disappoints me that some people carrying our last name hadn't earned it. The yard suddenly went quiet. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. I forced a nervous smile. Dad, please. But he wasn't finished. No, I'm serious, he continued. A family name means something. It stands for honor, tradition, and respect. Not everyone deserves to carry it. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe he was doing this here, in front of everyone. My cousins looked away. My mother stared at the ground. Nobody said a word. Then came the sentence that shattered me. I've spent years thinking about it, he said, and honestly, I don't think she's worthy of our family name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The embarrassment burned through me like fire. 33 years old. Successful career. My own home. A life I built from nothing. And yet somehow in my father's eyes, I was still the disappointment. I stood there frozen while whispers spread across the crowd. Then I looked toward Grandpa. Until that moment, he had remained silent. But something in his expression had changed. Slowly, very slowly, he placed both hands on the arms of his chair and began to stand. And the second he did, the entire party fell silent. The moment Grandpa stood up, the entire backyard went silent. Even the children who had been running around stopped talking. My father still had that smug expression on his face, like he expected everyone to agree with him, like he had just spoken some profound truth. But when Grandpa straightened his back and looked directly at him, something shifted. I had known my grandfather my entire life. He was kind, patient, and rarely raised his voice, but the look in his eyes that day was one I had never seen before. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. Dennis, Grandpa said calmly. My father's smile faded. Yes, Dad. Grandpa took a slow breath. Sit down. The firmness in his voice surprised everyone. Dad hesitated for a second before awkwardly lowering himself into his chair. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Grandpa's eyes swept across the crowd before finally settling on me. Then he smiled. Not a forced smile. A proud smile, the kind a parent gives when they're looking at someone they deeply love. And suddenly I felt tears forming in my eyes. Because I couldn't remember the last time anyone in my family had looked at me that way. You think she isn't worthy of our family name? Grandpa asked. Dad shifted uncomfortably. I was only saying, no. Grandpa interrupted him. You were trying to humiliate your daughter. The words landed like a hammer. Several relatives immediately looked away. My father opened his mouth, but Grandpa wasn't finished. For 33 years, I've watched you criticize her. The backyard was so quiet that I could hear the wind moving through the trees. I watched you ignore her achievements. Dad's jaw tightened. I watched you praise Jason for things that barely deserved recognition while acting as if your daughter's accomplishments meant nothing. Now people were staring at my father. Not me. Him. For the first time in my life, and he clearly hated it. "Dad, that's not fair," he muttered. Grandpa laughed bitterly. "Not fair?" He pointed toward me. That young woman worked 2 jobs to pay her way through college. I felt my chest tighten. Very few people knew that. I had never talked about it. She graduated with honors. People around me began exchanging surprised looks. She built a successful career. Another pause. She helped her mother financially when you refused. That one hit like a balm. Several heads snapped toward my father. My mother's eyes widened. Dad's face turned pale. Because it was true. Years earlier, when my parents were struggling financially, I had quietly helped my mother cover bills. I never told anyone, not even Grandpa. At least I didn't think I had. Yet somehow, he knew. Grandpa shook his head. "You talk about family honor while standing on a mountain of hypocrisy." The crowd gasped. I had never heard Grandpa speak like this, ever. Dad looked furious now. "You don't know everything." "Oh, I know enough." Grandpa's voice grew stronger. "I know who visits me every week." Silence. "I know who calls me." More silence. "I know who remembers my birthday." My father looked down. And suddenly everyone understood where this was going. Grandpa wasn't talking about Jason. He wasn't talking about Dad. He was talking about me. For years, I had driven across town every Saturday morning to visit him. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch. Sometimes we'd play cards. Sometimes we'd just talk. I never told anyone because I didn't think it mattered. Apparently, it mattered to him. "A family name isn't protected by pride," Grandpa said. "It is protected by character." I saw several relatives nodding. Dad looked trapped, like the ground beneath him was disappearing. Then Grandpa turned toward the crowd. "Do all of you know who was at the hospital? When I had heart surgery 3 years ago?" Nobody answered. "She was." His finger pointed directly at me. My eyes widened. I hadn't expected that. "Do you know who spent nights sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs?" Again, his finger remained pointed at me. "Do you know who canceled work meetings to help me recover?" The tears I had been fighting finally started falling, because I remembered every one of those moments, and I remembered doing them because I loved him, not because I wanted recognition. Grandpa looked back at my father. "You want to know who deserves our family name?" His voice cracked slightly. Then he pointed at me again. "She does." My heart nearly stopped. The entire crowd erupted into murmurs. My father looked stunned. But Grandpa wasn't done. Not even close. He slowly reached inside his suit jacket. Then he pulled out a folded envelope. I immediately recognized it. It was the same envelope I had seen sitting on his desk a week earlier. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now my stomach tightened, because Grandpa was holding it up for everyone to see. And judging by the look on my father's face, whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. The second Grandpa held up that envelope, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I wasn't the only one. My father looked nervous. Not annoyed, not angry, nervous. And that alone told me whatever Grandpa was about to reveal wasn't something Dad wanted anyone to hear. The crowd watched in complete silence. Even the music had been turned off. Grandpa glanced at the envelope before looking directly at my father. "Dennis," he said quietly, "I gave you many opportunities over the years." Dad swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" Grandpa sighed. "The truth." A chill ran through me, because suddenly I realized this wasn't just about the insult Dad had thrown at me. This went much deeper. Much deeper. Grandpa slowly opened the envelope and pulled out several folded documents. The moment Dad saw them, the color drained from his face. I had never seen him look afraid before. Not once. But he looked afraid now. "What is that?" one of my uncles asked. Grandpa looked around the crowd. For years, members of this family have believed a story. Nobody interrupted him. They believed Dennis was the one who sacrificed the most for this family. My father stared at the ground. They believed Dennis helped build our family business. A few relatives exchanged confused looks. They believed Dennis was the responsible son. The silence became unbearable. Then Grandpa raised the papers. That story was never true. A wave of whispers spread through the backyard. Dad immediately stood up. This isn't the place for this. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. No, this is exactly the place. Dad, sit down. The command was sharp enough to stop him instantly. My father slowly lowered himself back into his chair. For the first time in my life, I saw him looking powerless. Grandpa turned toward the family. 30 years ago, when your grandmother and I were trying to save our business, we nearly lost everything. I had heard bits and pieces of that story growing up, but never the full version. The banks were preparing to take the property. People listened carefully. We were drowning in debt. Grandpa paused, and Dennis promised he would help. Several relatives nodded. That was the version everyone knew. The version Dad had proudly repeated for decades. Grandpa lifted one of the documents. What nobody knew was that he never helped. The entire crowd froze. Dad immediately shook his head. That's a lie. Grandpa ignored him. The money that saved our business came from someone else. Now everyone looked confused. Even I did, because I had no idea where this was going. Grandpa unfolded a yellowed piece of paper. This is the original loan agreement. He handed it to my uncle. My uncle read it. Then his eyes widened. He read it again. What? Someone asked. My uncle looked stunned. The loan wasn't from Dennis. Murmurs erupted everywhere. Dad's face turned white. Grandpa nodded. No, it wasn't. The backyard suddenly felt smaller, like everyone was holding their breath. Your grandmother gave up her retirement savings. Gasps spread through the crowd. Grandpa continued. She sacrificed nearly everything she had built over her lifetime. I felt tears forming again. Grandma had passed away years earlier. She had always been quiet about her sacrifices, apparently far quieter than anyone realized. Grandpa looked at Dad, and while she was risking everything to save this family, Dennis was doing something else. Dad jumped to his feet. Enough. No. Grandpa's voice thundered across the yard. The force of it shocked everyone, including me. For 30 years, you've enjoyed praise that never belonged to you. Dad looked trapped, cornered, exposed. Grandpa held up another document. This shows where your money actually went. My father closed his eyes, almost like he already knew what was coming. Grandpa handed the document to another relative. The woman read it silently, then covered her mouth. Oh my God. The crowd immediately became restless. What is it? What does it say? She looked at Grandpa, then at Dad, then back at the paper. It shows he used the money to buy himself a sports car. The reaction was immediate. Gasps. Shock. Disbelief. Several family members actually stood up. No way. You're kidding. Seriously? I stared at my father, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to explain. He didn't, because he couldn't. Grandpa slowly nodded. While his mother was sacrificing her future, he was spending money on himself. The disappointment in Grandpa's voice was heartbreaking. For years, Dad had acted like he was the hero of every family story, and now that image was collapsing in front of everyone, piece by piece. Then Grandpa looked toward me. His expression softened. There is something else this family deserves to know. I felt my stomach drop again. What now? Grandpa smiled sadly. 5 years ago, I updated my estate plans. The entire crowd became silent. Every person there understood what that meant. Inheritance. Dad understood too. His eyes widened instantly. Don't do this? Grandpa ignored him. For years, I planned to leave everything equally. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. But over time, I learned something important. His eyes met mine. Character matters more than blood. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I couldn't stop them. Grandpa continued speaking. I watched one grandchild show up again and again. I lowered my head. I watched one grandchild help without being asked. More tears. I watched one grandchild care about people rather than appearances. The crowd followed his gaze toward me, and suddenly I realized what was happening. Dad realized it too. His face went completely pale. Dad! Grandpa raised a hand. No, The word stopped him cold. For years you've been obsessed with family legacy. The old man stood taller. So today, I'm gonna define what legacy actually means. He lifted one final document from the envelope. The official document. The one that changed everything. This is the final version of my estate plan. The entire backyard seemed frozen in time. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Grandpa looked directly at me, his eyes filled with pride. Then he said the words that nobody expected, especially my father, the person I chose to carry forward this family's legacy. He paused. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. "Is my granddaughter?" The crowd erupted. People gasped. Others began talking all at once. My father looked absolutely devastated. But then Grandpa revealed one final detail, a detail so shocking that even I didn't see it coming. And the moment he said it, my father's entire world fell apart. The backyard exploded with whispers. I could barely hear anything over the pounding of my own heart. My father looked like he had been hit by a truck. For years, he had acted as though he was the guardian of our family's legacy. He spoke about honor, tradition, and the family name every chance he got. And now, Grandpa had just announced, in front of everyone, that I was the one chosen to carry that legacy forward. But Grandpa wasn't finished. Not even close. He slowly raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent again. Then he looked directly at my father. "You think that's the shocking part?" Dad stared at him without saying a word. Grandpa held up the final page of the estate documents. "No." His voice was calm. "The shocking part is why I made that decision." A knot formed in my stomach. I had no idea what he was about to say. Grandpa took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I asked each member of this family a simple question. People exchanged confused looks. "What question?" one of my cousins asked. Grandpa smiled sadly. I asked them what they would do if they inherited everything I own. The crowd listened carefully. Then Grandpa turned toward my father. Dennis said he would expand his investments and increase the family's financial standing. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Grandpa looked toward another relative. Others talked about houses, vacations, businesses, and personal goals. Nobody said anything. Then his eyes found me. I suddenly remembered that conversation. It had happened during one of my Saturday visits. At the time, it had seemed casual. I never imagined it was important. Grandpa smiled. When I asked my granddaughter, she gave me a completely different answer. The tears returned instantly. Because now I remembered exactly what I had said. Grandpa's voice cracked slightly. She said she would make sure every member of the family was taken care of. Silence. Complete silence. She said that if she had more than she needed, she would use it to help others. Several relatives lowered their heads. Grandpa continued. She never asked how much money there was. My chest tightened. She never asked what properties existed. Another pause. She only asked whether everyone would be okay. I couldn't stop crying. Not because of the inheritance, because someone had finally seen me. After years of being treated as if I wasn't enough, after years of criticism, after years of feeling invisible, someone had noticed. Grandpa slowly folded the documents. That's when I knew. My father looked away. Legacy isn't about wealth. Grandpa's voice remained steady. It isn't about power. He glanced toward Dad. And it certainly isn't about ego. Every word landed like a hammer. Then came the final revelation. The one that shattered the illusion my father had built around himself for decades. Grandpa looked directly at the crowd. 6 months ago, I offered Dennis an opportunity. Dad immediately tensed. My stomach dropped. What opportunity? Grandpa answered the question himself. I told him I was considering creating a charitable foundation in our family's name. Several relatives nodded. That sounded exactly like something Grandpa would do. Then his expression darkened. I asked him if he would help manage it. Nobody moved. What happened? My aunt asked quietly. Grandpa looked disappointed. He told me it would be a waste of money. Gasps echoed across the yard. My father's face turned bright red. Grandpa continued. He said helping strangers wouldn't benefit the family. More silence. He suggested keeping every dollar for ourselves. The disappointment in Grandpa's voice was devastating. Because it wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. The heartbreak of a father realizing who his son had become. Then Grandpa looked at me. A week later, I asked my granddaughter the same question. I remember that conversation too. He had asked if I believed wealthy families had a responsibility to help others. I hadn't even needed time to think. Of course they do, I had answered. Grandpa smiled, and that's when my decision became final. My father closed his eyes. Defeated. For the first time in my life, he had nowhere to hide, no excuses, no audience willing to believe him, no story he could twist. The truth was standing in broad daylight, and everyone could see it. A few moments later, something unexpected happened. My mother stood up. Everyone turned toward her, including Dad. For years, she had remained quiet. She had avoided conflict. She had stayed in the background. But not this time. She walked across the yard until she was standing beside me. Then she wrapped her arms around me. I froze.